The real reason why these actors left the Waltons. For 9 seasons, from 1972 to 1981, the Waltons told American television audiences that family was the one thing worth holding onto no matter what the world took away. Every episode closed the same way. Lights going out one by one across the farmhouse, voices calling goodnight through the dark, a whole country settling in with that warmth before the screen went black. It became one of the defining images of 1970s television. A family that didn't just survive hardship, but seemed to grow closer because of it. What that goodnight ritual never showed was what was happening to the people saying it. Behind those warm scenes, the cast was quietly falling apart, through illness, through exhaustion, through political persecution that predated the show by 2 decades, and through the simple, human desire to be known as something other than one character for the rest of their lives. Some of it has been discussed in interviews over the years. Some of it only makes sense once you look at the full picture. And the story that started the unraveling isn't the one most people expect. The actor who walked away on his own terms. Richard Thomas was 21 when he first played John Boy Walton, the oldest of the 7 Walton children, an aspiring writer coming of age in the Blue Ridge Mountains during the Great Depression. John Boy was the show's narrator and its emotional center, the character audiences followed most closely as he tried to reconcile his ambitions with his loyalty to the family. Thomas won a Primetime Emmy for the role in 1973, just a year into the show's run, and by the mid-1970s, he was one of the most recognizable young actors on American television. According to Thomas's own account, the decision to leave wasn't a sudden crisis of conscience. He has said in interviews that when he signed his original contract, he privately decided he would stay with the series no longer than 5 years, long enough to commit fully to one project, but not so long that it became the only thing he was known for. He held to that plan. When Season 5 wrapped in 1977, he left, despite reported hopes from producers and castmates that he'd re-sign. Eric Scott, who played Ben Walton, has said publicly that he and others on set assumed Thomas's 5-year limit was a negotiating position rather than a real deadline, and felt genuinely blindsided when Thomas actually walked. The writers handled his exit as gracefully as the story allowed. John Boy moved to New York to pursue his writing career, consistent with everything the character had worked toward. It didn't feel like a plot contrivance. The door was left open for Thomas to return, and for a few years, he made only brief guest appearances. What happened next is the part of the story worth sitting with. Thomas did solid work on Broadway, which suited his stage training, but the film career that was supposed to justify leaving a hit show at its peak never fully materialized in the way he might have hoped. Meanwhile, the show couldn't leave John Boy's storyline hanging forever. Producers eventually recast the role, bringing in actor Robert Whiteman to play John Boy for seasons 8 and 9. Whiteman was a capable performer, but longtime viewers noticed immediately that something had shifted. The show adjusted, redistributing narrative weight onto other Walton children, but the center of gravity was different. When the Waltons began producing reunion movies in the 1990s, Thomas returned to play John Boy alongside his surviving original castmates, and he has spoken candidly since about what those years away taught him. In a 2023 interview, reflecting on the decision, he described it with self-aware humor, the confidence of, in his words, a 26-year-old who thought he knew exactly what he was doing. What's clear from his more recent comments is that he came to see the role not as a cage he'd escaped, but as the foundation the rest of his career was actually built on. Walking away from it at the height of its popularity remains one of the more instructive examples in television history of how hard it is to accurately judge what you have while you're still standing inside it. The grandfather who survived something worse than fiction. Will Geer played Grandpa Zebulon Walton from the show's first episode, and for millions of viewers in the 1970s, he was simply the warm, weathered patriarch of the mountain, a man who seemed to have been born wise, who sat on the porch and made hardship sound survivable. What most of that audience didn't know was that the man playing their favorite grandfather had spent more than a decade of his career being systematically shut out of the industry by his own government. Geer had been a prominent actor and left-wing activist since the 1930s, closely involved in labor organizing, and a close personal friend of Woody Guthrie. The two toured government work camps together during the Depression and later released a folk album, Bound for Glory, in 1956. When the House Un-American Activities Committee began investigating communist influence in Hollywood, Geer's name came up. He was called to testify, and he refused to name others. The consequence was blacklisting throughout the 1950s, nearly a decade during which mainstream film and television work simply wasn't available to him, and he supported himself and other blacklisted performers through stage work and the theater he founded, the Theatricum Botanicum, in Topanga Canyon. By the time he was cast as Grandpa Walton in 1972, in his late 60s, Gere had already lived through an experience the fictional Waltons never had to face: total professional exile over a matter of conscience. He won a Primetime Emmy for the role in 1975. There's a real irony in the fact that a show built around the idea of American decency and community was anchored, in part, by a man who had been punished for a decade for defending exactly those values in real life, and who carried that history without much visible bitterness. Gere completed filming on season 6 before he died of respiratory failure on April 22, 1978, at 76 years old. His final scene, with his on-screen wife Ellen Corby, who had herself just returned from a long absence, ended up being the last the two ever filmed together. Producers chose to write his death into the story rather than replace him, honoring Grandpa Walton's absence with a season 7 premiere episode, The Empty Nest, in which the family gathers at his grave. As the decades passed and the history of the Hollywood blacklist received a fuller public reckoning, what had once been used to end Gere's career was re-examined as one of the more shameful chapters in American institutional history, a fact that adds real weight to every scene he filmed. The Emmy-winning grandmother, who wrote her own recovery into the script. Ellen Corby brought a dry wit and precision to Grandma Esther Walton that balanced Gere's warmth perfectly. She'd already had a long career as a character actress by the time the role came to her, including an Academy Award nomination for I Remember Mama in 1948. On The Waltons, she became one of the show's most beloved presences, winning 3 Primetime Emmys for the role, in 1973, 1975, and 1976. In November 1976, during production on Season 5, Corby suffered a severe stroke at 66 years old. It significantly affected her speech and mobility. According to accounts from cast and crew, it was Will Gere who first realized something was wrong when Corby didn't show up to set, and who accompanied producers to check on her at home before she was rushed to the hospital. What the show's producers did next was, for that era of television, genuinely thoughtful. Rather than quietly recasting the role, they wrote Corby's stroke into the story itself. Grandma Walton suffered a stroke on screen, and the family's response, the fear, the adjustment, the slow and incomplete recovery, became part of the ongoing narrative. That decision meant Corby's real situation was acknowledged rather than hidden, and her return, in the final episode of the 1977-78 season, felt earned rather than arbitrary. Her character's limited dialogue in the episodes that followed reflected Corby's own real recovery, by design. She remained a regular through the following season, dropped to a recurring role after that, and didn't appear in the show's final season, though she returned for 5 of the 6 Waltons reunion movies made between 1982 and 1997. What that whole stretch reveals about the production is worth noting. The Waltons regularly depicted a family responding to hardship with practical compassion instead of denial, and the choice to write Corby's stroke into the story, instead of pretending it hadn't happened, was a small act of integrity that lined up the show's real behavior with the values it broadcast every week. That kind of alignment doesn't happen by accident. For Emmys, and she still walked away. Michael Learned came to the Waltons in 1972 to play Olivia Walton, the family's mother, and turned what could have been a purely functional role into something far more layered, a woman whose patience and faith never quite hid how tired the work of holding a family together during the Depression actually was. The industry recognized what she was doing. She won the Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Drama Series 4 times, in 1973, 1974, 1976, and 1979, a level of sustained recognition very few performers in American television have matched. And then, after season 7, she left anyway. Learned has spoken about her reasons in interviews over the years with real honesty. It wasn't the character, and it wasn't her castmates. She's consistently spoken about both with warmth. It was the accumulated weight of 9 or 10 months of demanding production every year for 7 consecutive seasons. She wanted other work, and she wanted a life not entirely built around a shooting schedule. The show wrote her departure by giving Olivia tuberculosis, sending the character to a sanatorium for treatment, a solution that preserved her dignity and left the door open for Learn's eventual return, which she did make, both in later episodes and in the reunion films. Placed next to Richard Thomas's departure, Learn's decision reveals something different about what a long-running hit can cost the people inside it. Thomas left chasing something, a broader career, freedom from being defined by a single role. Learned left to recover something the show had gradually used up: time, energy, the basic capacity to have a life outside of it. Both are legitimate reasons to walk away from success. They just point in opposite directions. The actress who played the role first and never got to keep it. Before Michael Learned ever appeared on the Walton farmhouse set, another actress had already brought Olivia Walton to life. Patricia Neal originated the role in The Homecoming, A Christmas Story, the 1971 television movie that became the pilot for the series, and in 1971, Neal was one of the most respected dramatic actresses in America, an Academy Award winner for HUD in 1963. 6 years earlier, in February 1965, while pregnant with her fifth child, Neal had suffered 3 near-fatal cerebral aneurysms and spent weeks in a coma. She was 39. The recovery, guided in part by her husband at the time, author Roald Dahl, was long and demanding, and doctors who studied her case afterward describe a return to acting as remarkable. She earned an Academy Award nomination for the subject was Roses in 1968, proof of both how far she'd come and how much the process had cost her. By the time CBS decided to turn The Homecoming into a weekly series, Neal had delivered a performance widely praised for its intensity. But according to creator Earl Hamner Jr., producers weren't confident her health would support the demands of a weekly production schedule, and the role was recast. Michael Learned took over as Olivia Walton, and the show that 9 seasons of viewers came to know was built, in that sense, on a version of the character shaped by someone else's decade-long recovery from a medical catastrophe that very nearly ended her life. Neal went on to keep working in film and television for years afterward, proving her talent hadn't been diminished by what she'd survived. She simply never got to keep playing the role she originated. The youngest Walton, who chose a classroom instead. Cami Cotler played Elizabeth Walton, the youngest of the 7 children, across the entire 9-season run. 6 years old when the show began, 15 when it ended, which meant she grew up almost entirely in front of a national audience. Most child actors coming out of a long-running series face the same pressure. An industry that shaped their whole childhood has very specific ideas about what should come next, and those ideas rarely include leaving. Cotler left anyway. After the series ended in 1981, she didn't pursue the next role or the next opportunity to stay visible. She went to college and eventually became a teacher, a choice she has discussed in later interviews with real clarity. The industry she'd grown up inside simply wasn't what she wanted her adult life to look like, so she built a different one. What stands out about her story, especially set against everything else that happened to the people around her, is how clean the exit was. No comeback attempts. No gradual fade. Just a considered decision to leave a world most people in her position would have found very hard to walk away from. The musician who let the music pull him home. John Walmsley played Jason Walton, the musical son, across all 9 seasons, the character with the guitar and the piano, and the quiet way of processing the world through sound instead of words. That wasn't an accident of casting. Walmsley was a trained musician before he was an actor, and the show built the character around that reality. He stayed through the entire run. Unlike Thomas, he never tested what waited on the other side mid-series. But once the show ended in 1981, his path made clear where his real investment had been all along. Rather than continuing to chase acting roles, Walmsley moved toward music composition and production. His trajectory reads less like an exit from something and more like a return to it. The show gave him a national platform, and what he did with that platform was walk steadily back toward the work that had always mattered most to him. What staying actually cost. Ralph Waite, who played Patriarch John Walton Sr. across all 9 seasons, had already been an ordained Presbyterian minister and social worker before acting ever became his career, a detail that adds a particular weight to a role built entirely around steadiness and quiet authority. Waite was candid in later interviews about struggling with alcoholism during parts of his life, saying plainly that he found a way to get sober. He worked steadily until his death in 2014, at 85, and remained connected to the Waltons cast and its legacy until the end. His former castmates, including Michael Learned and Mary McDonough, spoke of him afterward not just as a colleague, but as something closer to family. The younger cast members carried their own weight, differently, but no less real. Mary McDonough, who played Erin Walton for all 9 seasons, has spoken publicly in the years since about the body image pressures she faced as a young actress growing up on a show specifically built around wholesome family life, pressures that led to serious health struggles that stayed with her long after production ended. Judy Norton, who played Mary Ellen Walton for the entire run, has described a related experience, growing up publicly, watched and loved as a character, while working out in private who she actually was outside of it. Taken together, what all of these stories reveal is something about what sustained, beloved creative work actually costs the people doing it, and how rarely audiences factor that cost into the warmth they feel watching from home. The Waltons built its reputation on depicting ordinary people holding together under real pressure. It turns out the people playing them were doing exactly the same thing, mostly off camera, for 9 years, without a script to guide them through it.